You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Lakers for Friday. Bryant Kamenetzky and Andy Kamenetzky. Excited to welcome in just a moment a great guest for today's show. Before we get there, though, I want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by Michelob Ultra. Enjoyment isn't the end game, it's the whole game. And at only 2.6 carbs and 95 calories, it's only worth it if you enjoy it. Andy, I referenced our guest. He is the author of a new book. It's a really great read for NBA fans. It's called Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. He can also be, you can find his work at Bleacher Report as well. He's Jake Fischer. Yay.
He's built to
Jake,
win,
how are you?
Jake Fischer himself.
Thank you guys so much. That was a very pleasant introduction. I'm excited to be here and have some fun. Thank you.
So yeah, Andy and I had a chance to look at the book and dive into it a little bit. And like I said, it's a great read. There's a ton of original reporting and great stuff on the Lakers teams that Andy and I covered. Horrendous and not a whole lot of fun. And what we learned later was that we were seen as perhaps not being optimistic enough, not enthusiastic enough about the team, to which I replied, what the hell are we supposed to do? Like, win more than 17 games? A chance. We tried. We did the best we could. And everybody talked about how much all they wanted to do was trade the people that we were supposed to be enthusiastic about. We did our best, Andy. We did our best, Jake. It's the best we could do.
Yeah, they didn't make it easy for you guys. I'll tell you that.
No, and we're definitely going to talk about. They're going to talk about. We're going to get into that era of the Lakers over the course of this interview. But in terms of tanking and that whole ethos, I wanted to actually begin by asking just, how do you define tanking? And do you think tanking has become a misunderstood term at all? Because it's become very broadly applied. It's like Xerox at this point in terms of like a catch-all thing.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I think tanking is when a franchise sets out from the get-go, from that whole opening tip of the season. We are intending to lose games this year with the goal in mind of the worse our record is, the higher the chances are we have at getting the number one pick in the draft. That, to me, is what it is. I mean, that's why I think the Lakers are an interesting topic, because they were not intentionally tanking, even though they were the worst team in the league for 5 years, from 2012 to 2017. They were not tanking. They were bottoming out, but they were not doing it intentionally.
Yeah, we try to explain that to people a lot. No, they're trying, which is a whole other issue. But is there a difference in your mind between trying to, what is the difference between trying to lose and doing things that are developmentally related, so where you're not necessarily trying to win? Do you understand the sort of the distinction that I'm making?
For sure. And that's why the book is called Built to Lose. It's because it's typically, construction by an executive fielding a roster of a lot of young players who don't have the talent yet or the in-game experience to really compete on a night-to-night basis. So you can sell it as, we're growing our guys. We hired this first-time assistant, new head coach who is known for player development and skill growth and all that type of stuff. And we can, sell this idea of, in 2 years, we'll be good. Come in now, get on the ground floor. The water's warm. Get on our bandwagon. And by the time this project has, reached its next level, we'll be in the playoffs and you'll be here and it'll all be worth it. That's kind of definitely the spin that franchises can put on the approach.
Why do you think it's so upsetting to, I guess, whether you're talking about fans, media, to other franchises around the league? Because to some degree, there's a big common sense element to this in terms of big picture thinking and trying to have a vision for an organization moving forward. You're not talking about teams like in the movie Major League, where they were trying to lose because they wanted to relocate or something like that and make everything so miserable in the process.
Every time you lose, you take a small cardboard piece off of Jim Buss.
Yeah, that was not crowd pleasing on a lot of levels. But I mean,
no.
Why do you think that this creates such a polarizing reaction? Because there is a very, I think, matter-of-fact element to this approach.
I think, the detractors talk about it from a holistic approach of you play to win the game, right? And I think when the NBA is at its healthiest is when the majority of teams in the league, their fan bases can show up to the arena that night and think that their team's got a shot at winning that game. But the reality, I think, and why this topic became to the point where something I could write a book about it, I think as these analytical-minded executives rose to power on the league, like it wasn't just Sam Hinkie. It was Rob Hennigan in Orlando and Ryan McDonough in Phoenix, and David Griffin comes to power in Cleveland, and there's Pete D'Alessandro in Sacramento, and Daryl Morey even hails from the Boston regime that they rebuilt, and they traded KG and Paul Pierce the same night that Sam Hinkie traded Drew Holiday to New Orleans. Like the team building strategy and the talk about roster construction has bled into the forefront of the media coverage and of fans' topics and conversations on social media. And I think now we talk more about this, abstract, the idea of what someone's trying to accomplish rather than the actual games themselves. So I think that's why it's also become such a hot button issue around, the sport at large.
That's interesting to me.
Oh, go ahead.
Really quick, just the idea that this is not a new thing. Like if memory serves, the Spurs tanked to get Tim Duncan. The Cavs were tanking to get LeBron, and I don't remember the reaction being this angry or even considered this big of a thing. I think it was mostly looked at as common sense. I think you raise a really good point, Jake, about how a lot of this is just the way something that has always been happening gets covered, or the way the league is viewed, or animosity about the way the league has shifted in terms of who runs it.
Yeah, because and just to add on to that, Andy, sorry to interrupt you, but like it happens in every sport. I mean, football, which has no lottery, here it's oh my God, the Jaguars won, and they're going to take themselves out of the Trevor Lawrence sweepstakes, whatever it is. It like Andy said, like it's not unheard of in other places. It's happened in the, but it is something that has become a much bigger deal now in the NBA than it used to be.
I think part of that is in basketball, there's only 5 guys on the court for one side, and they can play both sides of the ball. As much as the quarterback is considered by so many people to be the most important position in sports, it's not. Like the fact LeBron has been able to make 8 out of 10 finals or whatever it is, it's as much a testament to his greatness as it is to the way the NBA and the sport is structured, where he can play the entire game and dominate on both sides of the court. Like that's just the truth of the matter. So when those guys are available as a 19-year-old kid or an 18-year-old kid, for an opportunity to have him for 7 years. Like there's all this talk in the league right now about the pressure the Pelicans are starting to face about keeping Zion Williamson. But is he really going to turn down a max contract to stay in New Orleans? Is he really going to turn down $200 million? Probably not. No one's ever done that yet before. So as much as there's all of this controversy, like the Pelicans tanked, they definitely did. They got Zion. And here they are. So I think that's why it's so prevalent and valuable in the league too, because
they're in great shape right now.
Coming in every year. Yeah, the Grizzlies did it. And they got John Morant in the same draft. Yeah. So there's a lot of benefits to this.
Okay, let's stick with that for a second, because it relates, as you mentioned, a little bit to the Lakers. Certainly how they got good, but also what they were trying to do while they were terrible. Because I have kind of a fundamental question to ask about the idea of tanking. We'll do that next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by RockAuto.com. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models out there, it's impossible to stock all the parts you would need in a traditional chain storefront. And why would you spend 30%, 50%, 100% more for the exact same parts in a chain store or new car dealership anyway? You can get it for far less at RockAuto.com. RockAuto.com always offers the lowest prices possible rather than changing the prices based on the market like the airlines do. Do not get me started on the airline. Jake, your next book should be an expose to bring down that entire industry, because it's built to win, and that's actually a problem. But RockAuto.com, they're a family business, Jake. If you write a book on them, it's going to be all positive. They serve auto part customers online for 20 years and counting, whether it's for your classic or daily driver. Get everything you need in a few easy clicks delivered directly to your door, just like Jake's book when you order it. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck. Write Locked On in the How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. RockAuto.com.
Okay, Jake, so you mentioned in that question that Andy asked before the break, you mentioned Rob Hannigan in Orlando. You mentioned the Cavs. You mentioned what's going on in New Orleans. You talked a little bit. All of these situations are sort of tanking, half tanking, accidental tanking, whatever it might be. Mike, it leads me to this basic question. Does tanking work? And if it does, like, when does it work and when doesn't tanking work?
I think it's a difficult question to answer, being that I don't think a lot of people accept my answer to this, because I don't think, not to be highfalutin and holier than thou, but I don't think fans really understand how the NBA's like results business actually works. The goal is not to win a title. On its face, it is. But the goal really is to put yourself in the conversation and the true group of contenders that have a shot. Because look at these playoffs in particular, right? Injuries happen, infighting happens. There's so much at play that's working against even the best built team, the most talented team, to actually win the title, that these top executives, the indirect truth serum into them, they'll say, I'm just trying to put myself and my team in the position to even have a shot at it. So with tanking, I think, if you bottom out for a couple years and you load up a bunch of all-stars and you put yourself in the position to win a title, if this doesn't work out, if you're there in the conversation, you are a threat and you are a viable contender. I think it works. But a lot of people will look at Philly and say, especially if they lose to Atlanta, they never got out of the second round. But obviously there's been dramatic collapses in their last two games that I don't think is a negative result of tanking. The Kawhi shot, I don't think, is a negative result of tanking. Even Boston, they made 3 out of 5 conference finals in the same time, right from the same rebuild that Philly did. And, they got Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown from those 2 Nets picks. And they added Kyrie and Horford and Hayward, and that was a bona fide, legitimate contender. Then they just struggled to keep it all together.
Well, I mean, only one team can win, but like there's the logic of it. Before we get to the Lakers part of this, the logic of it, like there's no point in the NBA of being aggressively average. Like,
yes,
there's no because then you're not in that conversation. You can, if you're even the Trailblazers. So a couple of years ago, they make a conference final, whatever it is. You can, if you can get into the playoffs and win a round or two, like you can talk about yourselves as at least we've got a chance. But if you're, kind of forever at the edge of the lottery or whatever it is, not only are you not getting the elite players who might be available in the draft, you're also not part of the conversation. You are functionally irrelevant at that point. That is the worst place to be in the NBA.
Exactly. So to me, if you go from the middle or if you go from the top and you go back to the bottom and you get back at least into that top conversation, even if you don't get that ring, I think it can work. I mean, Phoenix right now, they've got Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. They were not the 2 guys that they thought when Ryan McDonough traded for Emeka Okafor, who had a herniated disc in his back in 2013-14. He was not going to play. They thought they'd be the worst team in the West. They ended up winning 48 games. That's a whole other story in the book. But they didn't think it'd be Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. But sure enough, they get these 2 young all-stars, and Chris Paul wants to come. And if the Suns don't win the title this year, or if Chris Paul leaves in free agency, which I doubt he will, then people might not remember the Suns as effectively as if they won it all, right? So I do think tanking does work. It's so perilous to actually really get to that top of the mountaintop once you do start climbing back up.
Right. I would say too, before the next question, like it only affords you the opportunity to have access to players, but you still got to do it right.
Well, I think also too the rings culture and the way we look at a lot of this stuff, especially over like the last 20 years, really when we started thinking about anybody threatening, I think Michael Jordan in terms of the avatar of the NBA changed a lot of this, because I think in some ways we devalue the idea of 50 wins perennially and like how much of an accomplishment that actually is, even if you don't win a championship. Like you said, you are putting yourself legitimately in a place where you could win it all. And that's something like what Philadelphia has done. But then if they don't end up winning it all, people will say, well, I guess the process didn't work. It's like, well, no, it did work as a blueprint. It just didn't get you literally everything. And sometimes that doesn't happen just because like LeBron and Steph are in the league. Too bad.
The other thing I think people who do tank, not just people outside of it, people in the NBA, I think people don't recognize in the moment how much harder it's going to be after you draft those guys. That's when the real work starts. The three of us could go take over front office right now and trade away all our best players and compile as many assets as we can. We might not do as good a job as Sam Presti did compiling all these picks, but we could get some. But then we'd have some trouble trying to build it back up from there. So I think, and that's a task that is
maybe
tall.
You would. I think I'd be good. I think I'd be excellent at it.
It's a task that's tall for everyone.
The other thing that comes up a lot in your book is sort of the themes of markets, and so much of tanking is built around the idea of, teams who aren't the Lakers, that aren't the Nets, that aren't the whatever. If you're not in the giant market, you can't attract the players. And obviously, the Lakers basically just had to clear the runway for LeBron to come here because he wanted to. And then Anthony Davis, it's like, just keep offering David Griffin stuff until he says yes, because Anthony Davis wants to come here and eventually he's going to make it here. But how much does market matter versus, or like in addition to competence? Because the Lakers had a stretch where they were terrible and also tried to throw money at Carmelo Anthony, at Kevin Durant, who wouldn't even take a meeting, at LaMarcus Aldridge twice. They got two cracks at that, and they couldn't get anybody to take their money because nobody wanted to go near that dumpster fire. So how are those two things related in a market like LA?
For sure. And as I said before we got on air, I think a big reason why a lot of these teams tank is because they're not the Lakers, and they can't, like you said, wait for some superstar to sign there and then another one to want to trade for them. And I think the Lakers put themselves in a situation where they end up falling into this tanking conversation, being one of the rebuilding teams, because they shot themselves in the foot when they offered Kobe that golden parachute contract, as Clay Moser calls it in the book, in November 2013. They gave him 2 years, $48.5 million. And there's a lot of people, at least several people I talked to who were with the Lakers that time, who believed Kobe would have taken less. And not only did they pay him more than he would have taken, but you don't believe that?
I think those people are respectfully wrong, but continue.
I happen to think
he certainly had the opportunity.
No effing way.
We're taking a little bit less. I think his only benchmark was that he wanted to be the highest paid player in the league, and there was a lot more wiggle room that they had, which wouldn't have prevented them from taking. He
certainly could have done it, though. I doubt the Lakers said take $48.5 million or nothing. It's only this number that we're throwing.
Well, I don't think it was that either. I think it was just, here's our first offer, and they were like,
sure. Great. But I'm just saying, it's not like
there was certainly not a competitive bidding process.
Right. Here's our first offer, and it's our only offer, and it has to be specifically this number. If you offer to take less, we are going to decline our own number.
Exactly. I don't think. No, definitely not. And I think regardless of the number, regardless of what he would have been willing to come down to, signing him early prevented them from having two max cap spots. If they left him as unsigned, they could have gone into the luxury tax after they signed two stars. And that unfortunately coincided with when LeBron left Miami and Rich Paul and Mark Tremaine were holding meetings with people in Akron, with teams. They told Mitch Kupchak and every other executive that they talked to that LeBron is taking the max. So when the Lakers didn't have two max cap spots available, they couldn't get both LeBron and Melo. Melo was down to come for a little bit less. But after doing that for 4 years in Miami, LeBron didn't want to do that anymore. He wanted to have his max salary to, A, allow every player in the league to command their max salary, and B, to hold the GM and the management ownership's feet to the fire and to be able to say, I'm here. I want to compete for a title, just like he's doing it with the Lakers right now. So signing Kobe that early prevented them from having those two max cap spots. Who knows if it would have happened, but they shut the door before.
I mean, it's one thing if you end up with Melo and LeBron and a rehabbing Kobe or whatever, 6 or 7 or 8, 9 years, whatever that is. It's almost, what is that, 8 years ago now or something?
It's 7 years ago. Yeah.
Obviously that's a different deal, but they tried again. They tried to get Carmelo onto a team that was not going to be able to go anywhere with them. They were going to max out LaMarcus all. If the Lakers were more competent, managerially speaking, over the course of time, while they were the worst team in the league, would they have been able to get to this point?
I don't think so, because Jim Buss and Mitch Kupchak, from everyone I spoke to around that situation, they were steadfast in their belief that one summer a star will come and choose us, just like LeBron eventually did in 2018. But that was a long time, and Mitch Kupchak and Jim Buss were obviously not there to reap those benefits. And I do think that, you know, the result of all their – I mean, I have Travis Schlenk, the Hawks GM, calling the Lakers the worst managed team in the league over 5 years on the record in the book. And you can argue they were piecing together all those one-year contracts and really believing that Kobe at 36 and 37 and 38, after tearing his Achilles and hurting his knee and hurting his shoulder, they believed he could take them into the postseason, and that would be enough to show another star, come join me. So sure enough, it worked that they got all those second round, those number 2 picks, and they trade them for Anthony Davis, and LeBron's there, and they won the title. But yeah, it was a long, hard road to get there.
As I always tell people, Andy, Jim Buss deserves a statue for doing excellent work. It was unconventional, but look where it got us. If he was better at his job, the Lakers wouldn't be winning titles again.
There's two questions, Jake, off Kobe's contract and that general process that I want to ask you about when we get back. That even in all this well-covered territory that, you know, Brian and I have been around this for years, I've never heard quite explained. So we'll get into that coming up next. Locked On Lakers brought to you, though, by Built Bar. Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar ever. These are bars covered in 100% chocolate, Jake. They are soft. They're easy to chew. I'm not going to call out the ones that aren't.
They provide people the kind of fuel that's necessary to just like pound out a book.
Exactly.
You need that high protein, low sugar, low calorie thing.
Oh yeah, you eat a few of these, Jake, and still built to lose. It's just going to write itself. Built bars, they're healthy. They're great for the health conscious guy. You can lose or maintain weight while indulging in a delicious treat. Low calorie, low sugar, high protein, high fiber. Great for keto diets. Great flavors. You got the original ones like raspberry, coconut almond, salted caramel, banana bread. New ones like cherry barcia, lemon almond cheesecake, cookies and cream. They're perfect for someone like me who loves just really interesting, cool taste combinations. You never get bored eating the same thing over and over. Go to BuiltBar.com, use the promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your first order. Again, the code is LOCKED15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. All right, so Jake, we've been talking a lot about that period between Kobe basically tearing his Achilles and the Lakers eventually getting LeBron, and you know the issues that came from Kobe's contract. And one of the things that I think is interesting about this that I've never quite heard explained before, I understand why they gave Kobe as Clay Moser called it, the golden parachute contract. It was money that obviously would create a certain degree of cap issues for the Lakers, but at the same time, Kobe, over the course of time, absolutely earned that money. You know, he earned that type of send off, and I don't have any issue with him getting it. That being said, though, did you ever get a sense of why they decided to do it then? Like in the middle of that season, bidding against nobody. And I don't think, even if Kobe had threatened to leave, I don't think it would have been much of a threat, because Kobe's not an easy guy to just drop into another team, particularly a team that would have been contending like at that state. Did you ever get a sense of just why there was this urgency to do it then, as opposed to the upcoming offseason where he still could have gotten the same money and they would have had more cap flexibility?
Yeah, I think a large majority of what the Lakers did and how they functioned at that time was trying to broadcast messaging to potential stars to come join them. And I think you got to remember what happened that summer. Dwight Howard left them, right? And that was that left a lot of Lakers officials licking their wounds. That, you know, the whole Stay D12 billboards and all that type of stuff. You know, they really thought they were going to retain Dwight. And I think watching him leave for Houston made a lot of people at that franchise start to look in the mirror and be like, "Oh my God, maybe we can't just keep adding stars to Kobe. We can't just go from Shaq to Powell to Dwight to the next guy. Maybe we need to, you know, really show that Kobe is Kobe." and commit to him and show that we still view ourselves as this franchise that can, be a franchise of stars. And when you come here, we're going to treat you the same way that we're treating him. I do think that played a role in LeBron coming to LA. I really do, because I think he was interested in the Lakers in 2014 for, the reason why we're having this conversation. I think there was a viability, and I think part of that was definitely due to how they treated Kobe. And I think if flash forward to 2016, I think Kobe's retirement tour also made LeBron take an eye at like, oh, maybe that could be me in 7 to 10 years whenever I do hang it up myself too.
I guess there's some truth, but I got to be honest. I think a lot of it was just fear. I think a lot of it was Dwight Howard had just left. There was an enormous amount of concern about whether or not the team was being competently run, whether they still had any cachet. Fans were, to say the least, down on the team and on the front office and the direction that they were going. And I think they did it. Yeah, sure. You want to show you take care. You're the Lakers. You take care of your stars and all that. I think it was this shiny object to throw out at the fans. Look, we've still got Kobe. He's not going anywhere. We believe in him and all that. And it's a shiny object so you don't look behind the curtain. I think there was an enormous amount of fear at that time that moved into that discussion. Maybe it pays off eventually in LeBron understanding this is how the team treats its stars. I do not think that was, if not the primary motivation, I don't think it was the only motivation, though, when the Lakers made that move.
I think Dwight leaving really sent shockwaves and like, all right, let's have a gut check moment and like we gotta do something here. Yeah, I agree.
Today on the road to the finals, our NBA coverage, as always, brought to you by Michelob Ultra. It's only worth it if you enjoy it at 2.6 carbs, 95 calories. We can all enjoy the games a little more this season. Another thing I wanted to ask you about, and I love in the book, Jake, how someone mentions the Lakers falling ass backwards in the lottery picks, because that was literally the phrase I used for years in talking about this period, how they were doing everything to avoid the perception of tanking, the process of tanking, anything that looked like tanking, because not that they didn't think that it could work, but really that they felt it was the wrong image for the Lakers. You couldn't do this with Kobe on the roster. And they ended up falling ass backward into good fortune for several years through their own ineptitude with top 5, top 10 picks. Do you get a sense at all that they realize how lucky they got? And I ask this just because with hindsight comes reflection and learning that they can apply moving forward. Like that the people involved with this came to recognize, like, Jesus, we dodged a bullet of our own making.
I do know, and I'm pretty sure I wrote it in the book, that Lakers staffers were definitely keeping an eye on Philly, and they were really concerned they were going to lose that pick to Philly at a certain point in the 15 draft and the 16 draft and the 17 draft too. I mean, I definitely don't, maybe they weren't like, oh, we did get lucky, but I think they were like, whew, wipe on their brow when those picks did pop up. And when they pop up at 2, I mean, at a certain point, by 17, you're like, Jesus, are they going to keep getting 2 for perpetuity here? But then again, like even in 2019, the very first,
because 1 is too obvious.
Exactly. But in 2019, the very first year of the new lottery reform, remember, there was never a 4th drawing, and the Lakers, they stealthily benched LeBron. We had that questionable groin injury. They go all the way up, and they get the 4th pick, and that pick allows them to basically keep Kyle Kuzma and trading for Anthony Davis. Like they got lucky there too.
Okay, and that actually, Jake, leads to something I also want to ask you about, because I have been for a long time a proponent of a very reckless, unsourced, but strongly felt opinion that the league for several years rigged lotteries in order to help the Lakers get high draft picks, sometimes even beating mathematical odds in the process. Yeah. And this eventually turned into Randall, Russell, Ingram as their way of making up for the injustice that was the Chris Paul trade, #basketball reasons, #never forget. That was in a lot of ways the beginning of the Lakers spiral, and the league realized they had screwed over the Lakers, and they actually owed it to them to right this wrong in any way possible, even if it meant saving them from themselves. Did your reporting uncover any evidence of my theory?
My reporting uncovered 0 evidence of your theory, although I will say, to go back to your point about tanking has been around forever, David Stern put in the first version of the lottery in 1985 after his very first year as a commissioner, after the Rockets tanked for Hakeem Olajuwon. And what happened in 1985, the very first year of the lottery? The frozen envelopes. That's definitely allowed for conspiracy theories like this to happen over and over and over. I mean, the Sixers got the #1 pick in 2016, a couple months after they pushed Hinkie out, so people thought that was a review or like a reward. But I do think, there's a very complex machine with all these balls that pop up, and there's a lot of people watching it. So I believe the sanctity of the lottery.
With that in mind, though, did you not uncover the evidence because it doesn't exist? Because the NBA is just really good at covering it up, or because maybe you're just not a very good reporter? Did you consider that maybe you're just not to? I mean, people should still go by Built to Lose, how the NBA's tanking era changed the league forever. Just maybe understand it's not written by Woodward and Bernstein.
Listen, if there's one thing I'm good at in this life, I think it's being a reporter. I will stand by that. Talked to 300 people for this book, a lot of good info, but I don't think the evidence exists. I think there's representatives from every team every year in that back room. They've got Ernst & Young, the accounting firm, in there, making sure everything's all good. There's never been any complaints from people on the inside. There's only been complaints from people on the outside.
Sorry.
Well, the outside knows where we live.
It's much more fun.
Yeah,
you have to admit, Andy's theory is way more fun.
Yeah.
Well, but I'm correct though. The Lakers were screwed over by the league. The league did owe this to them because of Chris Paul, hashtag basketball reasons, hashtag never forget. And
you're right in that regard, definitely.
It's not only what's good for the Lakers and what's owed the Lakers, it also what was best for the league. So it was them being altruistic and benevolent, but also what was best for themselves. Like, it was one of those things that's selfless and selfish, which is why I believe it is possible through my totally reckless, unsourced, non-reporting.
Baseless speculation is the best kind of speculation. Right?
Oh, yeah.
It's really the only kind that we get into, to be honest.
What you do, Jake, it's admirable, but kind of a drag.
It's very hard. It's very hard.
Our way is much more fun.
Totally.
I would agree.
When there's some, before we let you go, there's some great stuff in there about this era of the Lakers accidentally tanking, and some of my favorite stuff involves the choice of Byron Scott as Lakers head coach. Why was Byron Scott named the Lakers head coach? That made no sense.
From what I was told, and I have this on pretty good, well-sourced authority, to go back to our last point, Byron's contract was 2 years, which was the length of Kobe's contract. They came into the league together. Yeah, and I really do believe, and from what I've heard, that it was a 2-year lame duck coach just to kind of ride with Kobe into the sunset and keep everything together and not, a total shit show. Because remember that the years before, when Jim Buss died, that allowed – or Jerry Buss died, allowed for all this infighting between Jeannie and Magic and her people and D'Antoni and Kupchak and Jim and their sides. And I think Byron was the one that everyone could get behind. And unfortunately, you're right. It made no sense. He was not the coach to develop all these lottery picks that they were getting inadvertently. And D'Angelo Russell despised him. I have him on the record calling Byron an idiot and telling me that he would take the most circuitous routes possible back to the bench when he got called out of games to avoid even high-fiving Byron, let alone getting pissed that he thought Byron took him out just to cause a controversy for Byron to be the star of the post-game press conference. So, yeah, it was definitely a head-scratcher for a lot of people involved, that's for sure.
Yeah, we covered those teams, and while I do think D'Angelo had a certain degree of validity in his criticisms with the way Byron treated him and utilized him on the court. And, we've talked about this with Byron before. We like Byron. We have a good relationship with him. The idea that he was pulling D'Angelo in order to make himself more of a post-game show, that's a little wild.
Yeah, that's what he believed. That's what he believed.
D'Angelo, I think, had some maturity issues at the time.
He
some
did.
Of which were well documented.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And he's a good player. Just the whole thing didn't make sense. He is, when you have a bunch of young guys who need to develop and all that, Byron Scott is in the modern NBA is not necessarily the choice that I would have landed on personally.
Yeah. There was an interesting tug and pull that whole 15-16 season of this is Kobe's retirement tour, but we have the next generation. And I watched his final game a couple weeks ago. I wrote a whole thing on Substack about that game. And you see him at the end, he's draped around Randall and Clarkson and D'Angelo. It's like, oh my God, this is the next gen. But that next gen couldn't really get started until Kobe and Byron, exit stage left.
Yeah, we covered that closely. It was, to say the least, awkward.
All right. The book is Built to Lose: How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. The author is Jake Fischer. You can pick up the book at Amazon, at your local bookstore, at everywhere they sell books.
Yep.
And you can check out his work at Bleacher Report and also on the Locked On Lakers YouTube channel. We'll try to get some stuff up there, a little exclusive stuff with our conversation with Jake. So check there as well. Jake, thanks so much for coming on. Congratulations on the book.
You got it. Thank you, guys. This was a lot of fun.